I'd be trained for some specialized duty on land in Vietnam. I did 3 tours in Vietnam, saw a lot of action, had a lot of the normal wartime stories, but along the line I decided not to tell war stories and not to tell about military experiences, because during my tour in Vietnam, during my first tour in Vietnam, I met my wife, and she was working for the military base where I was stationed. The day that I showed up was pretty much her first day at work, and she disappeared for a few days, and I was disappointed and asked about her, and little did I know that the name Ton in Vietnam was like Mary or Susie in the United States. There's many, many Tons in Vietnam. When I asked about her, they told me that she had TB and she wouldn't be back, and I thought, oh my God, what a shame. Well, a few days later, she showed up, and I thought, wow, what? During the period of time that she was gone, I was pretty green in Vietnam. I didn't know what they had there. I thought, well, what hospital might she be in? You know, could I send some flowers? Well, little did I know that in that culture, you don't send flowers to people who are still alive. Flowers are for dead people. And they don't have flower shops anyway, nor do they have hospitals. She wasn't in a hospital, nor has she ever been in a hospital. She actually had to get an ID card, and she was waiting for her blood test to be cleared so she could come back and work in food services on our base. So I was overjoyed when she came back, and I guess that must have been apparent by the way that I acted, because she and I became pretty close friends at the time, and the rest of the girls used to giggle and run away, and at one point in one of these stories I tell about how one of her girlfriends, who had an American boyfriend, asked me if I loved her, and I said, well, I don't know her well enough to love her, but I like her a lot, and that garnered such respect that they were in awe of that attitude, because it wasn't a common attitude for American GI to not just blurt out, oh yeah, I love her, you know, let's go make it permanent. But no, I didn't believe in doing that, and her and I developed a rapport based on the fact that she'd never had a conversation with an American, and I'd never had a conversation with someone from Vietnam, and I wanted to know that perspective, what they thought about the war, what they thought about politics, and what they thought about Americans in general. And she wanted to know the same thing about us. She knew enough English to be able to take a food order or take a drink order and deliver, but she never really had a conversation with an American. So as we became more interested in each other, I took courses in Vietnamese language and Vietnamese history so that I could tell a little bit more about what I was doing. And she took more English classes, and we got along quite well for quite some time. One of the stories that I've told through the years here is how we went on our first date, and after that sort of became an item. And there's some other interesting stories, like the one that I've titled The Walk Home, which is pretty interesting. It's a little bit about how we got caught up during a rocket attack, and I tried to save her, but I almost ruined an outfit that she was quite proud of that I'd bought for her in the States. But at any rate, this year I decided to tell a story about the first Christmas that we spent together, where even though we didn't have much on our base, we had more than they had. I'm talking about her mom and her sister and herself, who lived in a little hut in a village that was surrounding a Catholic monastery. The village was called Mika Village, and they were within eyesight of our base. Although it was off limits, we couldn't go there. And that was probably a collaborative agreement between the military and the village chief, because they didn't want bars and brothels in the shadow of a Catholic monastery. So it was made off limits to all military personnel. Well, after Ton and I had known each other for several months, I learned how to get down to the village to visit. Basically what I would do is I would go through the concertina wire and over the Claymore mines and past the slap flares and use the same path to get down to the village that the Viet Cong used to get to us. Now, since our perimeter was heavily guarded, I always had to clear with the guards who was on duty that night. I'd find out who they were going to be because we all took our turn. And then I had to clear it with them that it was okay if I breached their position. And I always kind of told them jokingly, if anything were to happen while I was down in the village, shoot the second guy back through the wire, because the first one back through the wire was going to be me. And that was always kind of a standing joke. Well, this Christmas, I'm looking at some packages that I got from the States, and I'm thinking, wow, her family isn't going to have anything. So I decided that I was going to take a package down to her family. But rather than sneak through the wire like I normally did, it being the holidays, I decided that I was going to go to my commanding officer and ask permission. So I made an appointment. I went to my commanding officer's office, and I asked his permission if I could take his package down to the village. And he said he couldn't do that. He could not grant me permission. And I, in my own way, which people that know me know that this is the way I am today, I informed him that I wasn't really asking his permission. I was just sort of informing him of what I was going to do. And he, as it turns out, was a very good friend besides being my commanding officer. And he's pictured in one of these photographs, as a matter of fact. He asked me off the record that if I were going to go down there, just exactly at what time and what position would it be that I would be going through the wire. And I told him that I would probably be going out in front of Tango 3 about 9 or 10 o'clock that night. So I didn't know at that point what to do, whether to proceed or whether not. And I decided I was going to do it anyway, regardless. So that night I dressed up in my camouflage and put my war paint on for my camouflage my face, and took the package in arms and started down to the village. And when I started in front of Tango 3, the commanding officer's vehicle was at the base of the tower. And I thought, wow, what is he going to do? I don't know. And I waited for a long time thinking, well, maybe he's just doing a routine. I don't know. Let me see what I'm going to do. Well, I went. I went on down there, and I delivered the package. And in the package was a canned ham for her mom. They don't have ham in Vietnam. They have pork, but they don't have ham, and she loved it. She loved it to death. And I was glad I was able to do that for her. And when I got back the next day, I ran into the guy that I'd already cleared with to go through Tango 3. And I said, hey, what was the old man doing up there? And he said, it was the strangest thing. He said he came up about 9 o'clock, and he stood me at attention facing the other way. And he took over my watch. And I figured out that he didn't want this guy to break regulations for me, but he took it as his own responsibility. Now, through the years, after 17 years, we got back in contact after the war with her family. And after 24 years, we started making visits back to Vietnam, and we, to this day, go back every other year. And when we do, I always make sure that I take canned ham for her mom. Sadly, yesterday we lost her mom. She didn't do real bad for a third world country. She was 99 years old and had never been to a doctor in her life. So she died in her sleep, they say peacefully. And I'm glad that I was able to contribute to that first Christmas and many years after that. Her mom was sort of regal in my mind. I'll never forget the day we met. She was in a chair similar to this one, only it was solid wood. Whoops. And she seemed, even though she was only 4'2", she seemed tall and very much in command to me. She, for some reason, kept looking at my feet, and I thought, I don't know what kind of an impression that I might be making on her. Little did I know that I was the first one to step into the family home in 300 years with my shoes on. I was in combat gear. I could not take my boots off, but evidently that was a pretty major taboo in those days. But after all those years, on one of our trips home, and this was not very long ago, I think probably 6 or 7 years ago, she called me to her bedside when we were back visiting, and she said, well, I'm going to accept you as my son-in-law after all